in the Valley of the Kings. Think of China. Even today, they have the Day of the Dead, or I forget what it's called. But anyway, some of the more older civilizations have retained even remnants of this, insistence of the ability to communicate with souls. And when I mentioned piercing the veil of the space-time continuum, our Guru, Paramahansa Yogananda, made the statement that the only thing that separates us from being able to see souls in the astral world is the vibration of space, which he said is an actual vibration. I've heard it said that, I'm not sure I'll get this totally right, but somebody who, let's say, has been blind from birth, it's been said that if they were to acquire their sight, those few who do later in life, have to adjust to the spatial dimensions. Everything is flat. Just as if I try to draw a horsey on a piece of paper, it's just sort of, one-dimensional. Space is a vibration, and we get used to seeing it. Time is too, but that's even more weird for us. But nonetheless, this ability to communicate with souls, astral souls, who it is said, has always been said, are right here, so to speak, in one way or another, is a remnant from the mental age coming into Dwapara. And these different civilizations hung on to that. There's even an amusing story, well known to anybody who studied it. Ramses the third initiated a lawsuit after he died. Swear to God. And he did that because mediumship was common in those times. And through the medium, he identified his killer from his harem, which is one why we don't recommend that. I remember one of the first metaphysical books I read long, long ago was the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And then there's the Egyptian Book of the Dead. We know the great tradition that has survived more than any other that I know of the lamas who are reborn. And you know the story of the little boy here in Seattle and so forth. An amazing power, if you will, from a higher age. Okay, I think I'm good. The last piece, I think, for this chapter in Descending Dwapara Yuga is man's relationship to God. In Sati Yuga, the highest age is the perception generally held by humans at that time of the direct perception of divinity. In Treta Yuga, it's not a direct perception, but it's the recognition of divine magnetism, meaning the ability to, through intuition, to see the powers that you might say rule the universe. And so they begin to identify these elemental powers and to personify them in their relationship to them. In Dwapara, which is what we're talking about, Descending Dwapara Yuga, man becomes more of a supplicant, okay, attempting to appease these elemental forces, using various things that we've already identified as magic. And it's during Descending Dwapara that the priesthood begins to appear, because the powers to make these contacts, whether by fraud or otherwise genuine, begins to reside in those few who make the effort to retain those powers using the instruments from Treta Yuga. Okay, I've said all that before. Yes. Oh. Okay. All right. Loss of knowledge, loss of energy. Oh, these are just some of the last points they make in general. We've mentioned it before. The quality of construction and of arts and crafts declined, which is an anomaly to conventional historians and so forth. Let's see. Ah, yes, they used the story of Moses when he came down from Mount Sinai. He found the Israelites whooping it up like at a rock concert, so it seems, worshiping a golden calf. They weren't very bright, but you know the desert gets to you after a while. And as evidence of the loss of knowledge. The law, they could create the calf, but they didn't know what it meant. Okay, and then they make the interesting point that here we are in ascending Dwapara Yuga, and guess what's coming onto the planet? Reincarnation. All these amazing stories that are, so many books and things that are penetrating even our culture. The book on the little child, Soul Survivor, for example, and the near-death experiences, testimonies coming out year after year in increasing amount. Alternative energy medicine, Ayurveda, the things that Padma mentioned from descending Dwapara, yoga, and so forth. The growing dissatisfaction with technology, the mistrust of technology. Not that most of us want to throw it away, but we know it's not enough. And so we know that it has to be used with wisdom and so forth. This growing trend that there's that the consciousness behind what we do is increasingly important more than what we do. Okay. All right, so that's chapter 18. Any thoughts, reflections, other than from John Clark? No, seriously.
Questions all that long.
I know. Me too. But seriously, anybody? Yeah, Sean.
Well, I just have a comment. It seems that from what we've learned that we didn't have taxes in Treta Yuga in the beginning, descending Dwapara Yuga.
In descending Dwapara we did, yes.
Well, at the beginning of descending.
Yes, that's right, yes. At least according to our authors. Well, a city, if you didn't have cities, you would have very little need for government and taxation and so forth. When you form cities, what with infrastructure and the regulation of trade and commerce and so forth, and protection of the cities, you need to raise money for general purposes. Yeah. Is that, you're suggesting something here, John?
This kind of connects to all of the yugas. I often think about Jesus Christ coming at the bottom of Kali Yuga and what he had to face. And he had to, right, we came at the most brutal time, and so in order to make an effect, I think being nailed to a cross was probably a good way to do that, and that was the way it was done. Right? So in other ages, of course, avatars come, and I assume that their mission has to be very different depending upon the yuga in which they come. So at the top of Satya Yuga, do they even need an avatar to come, or are people just too close to
I wouldn't think so.
God?
Doesn't mean they can't come, but
the avatars can kind of take a break then, or
I think they go on holiday. Yeah, I'm sure they do. Yeah. Poor Jesus Christ.
Andrew took it on. Something to you, dear. Andrew has something to say.
Andrew, yeah.
So kind of following on to that, we hear that in the astral world, it's harder to reach God because everything's so beautiful and so attractive. Would it not make sense then that in the higher yugas, it's harder to reach God because you're so happy here? Whereas in Kali Yuga, it's so horrible.
And he talks about that.
Yeah. There's definitely a parallel there.
Sri Yukteswar talks about that too.
Yeah. It's just that on this earth plane, because of its dimension aspect, physical and so forth, the ability to perceive higher realities in the physical body must provide a kind of enlightenment that when it's so subtle on the astral realm, it just sort of doesn't matter. So I think there can be some growth there, but it seems like there's a parallel. So we're all going to get out. We're not going to wait to Satya Yuga, right? Boring. We're going to get out. Okay, somebody, Rashmi.
I just had a couple of comments. One of them related to what John Clark was saying.
No.
About wasn't Swami? Didn't Swami say that he was in around the Mahabharata time and he left because he didn't want to get involved in that battle, and so that was the battle. And then there are references in the Indian tradition, and I can't remember where it is. Probably the Bhagavatam, where Sri Krishna tells Arjuna that, okay, now it's a descending age, so you have to do it this way, and you can't just do it in this higher way. So there are references there.
Yes.
And that, a lot of people in India refer to. And then there's also references to, Parmanu, which is Anu is atom, and then that's, I don't know, people say it's like atomic warfare, and then he has a weapon that brings down disease, which people say is biological warfare or whatever.
Yes.
But I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, do you remember in the Mahabharata, after the war, the Pandavas, the victors, went off to the Himalaya because they saw the Kali Yuga coming, and they left it with their nephew and said, "Good luck, bud, and I'm out of here." And so there's clear references to that. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's quite interesting. John.
Make the point.
Okay.
That everybody else here only has one name, like Brazilian soccer players. Every time I'm called, it's John Clark.
Are you asking for a spiritual name, John?
I think he is.
John Clark, that's it.
Okay, we got 2 more chapters to go through here.
Yeah. Could you write your questions down, John?
I did want to mention that the night after Vyasa gave his thing here last week, we were having coffee in the morning, and it occurred to me, most of you I think were there that night, and you saw in the beginning he had that slide of Vishnu in the Eastern tradition with the energy going into his belly button and shooting back out, and the snake shape. And I asked him, I said, it occurred to me that how Master talks about the inner zodiac with Kriya, and how our inner zodiac is in a certain position when we're born, and it's in exact reflection of the outer zodiac. So there's a connection. Whatever's happening out there, it's actually really happening in here, and out there is a reflection, is the implication. That with that image, that everything he was talking about, the dual and the, a precession of the equinox and all of that, is true in the cosmology. But I was wondering if the energy going into through the belly button into Vishnu brings us within. So it's like the inner cosmology, and then it shoots out as a reflection in the outer cosmology, and whether the snake is Kundalini, which it's often depicted as in Eastern tradition. And so I don't have it like fully outlined, but whether all of that, what he was talking about happening out in astronomy, is actually happening also on the inside, and whether that's maybe what that image of Vishnu had. Anyway, it was an interesting thought that it could be that way. It's not like it's one or the other, but it's both that are happening at the same time. Just a thought. So, descending Dwapara, decline and transition, which is everything we're talking about so far in all these other chapters too. Magic declined with declining Dwapara. Self-interest gains momentum. The more self-interest grew, the less magic really worked. Okay? And the less it worked, the less people used it until they stopped using it because it wasn't working anymore, except those who were trying to do bad things. But they describe, for instance, if, let's say you have a computer and it's not working, and no matter what you do, it's not working, you stop using it, and you try to use some other kind of mechanism or tool to work with. And that's basically what happened in the decline until they stopped using their mental powers totally. Let's go on. Bronze Age collapse. So that's where in the lower descending Dwaparas, where cities were destroyed by war, there were mass graves. let's see, non-existent until later in war wasn't as much at the beginning. It was actually fairly a pure time, but in the descending time, they described the sea people. Remember in the chapter he talks about the mysterious sea people who seem to have destroyed all kinds of civilizations in the East and in the Mediterranean area. And nobody knows who they were or where they came from, except they came from the sea. But they totally destroyed, just massive destruction of civilization at the end of that decline of Dwapara. Let's go to the next one. So from 1200 BC to 700 BC is, let's see, they called it the Ancient Dark Age. It's the total confusion reigned in the world. There was no order. It was a pretty brutal place to be as we were descending down to Kali Yuga. And we became fixated on just the material world around us and basic survival in that material world. So it describes here the similar upheavals this is what Dakshina was asking. In the decline of Dwapara, is the Bronze Age collapsed and this whole worldwide destruction until about the time that Kali starts. And then we go through that darkness of Kali. And then in the modern commensurate area, when we look at it this way in a horseshoe, there is the worldwide conquest and taking over of nations and states from the 1700s on, colonialism, imperialism, everything that took place in that era. The maps of Europe and Asia and Africa have changed so much in these last 300 years, you can't keep up with it. I know when we immigrated to America when I was 10, I was really disgusted that nobody knew Suriname, where I came from. You know, what kind of place is this? I knew about America. Why didn't you know about Suriname, you know? But now if you were to ask me to talk about every country in Africa, I wouldn't be able to tell you what they all are. They've changed so much, and they changed names, and Asia and so on. So it's a sign of, and now as we're entering Dwapara, what's happening is what Yogananda predicted back in 47. He talked about there'd be a United Nations of Europe, United Nations of Asia, United Nations of America. It would be all of these reconnecting, reconsolidation that would happen as we begin working together. The euro, these are all symbols of that new momentum and direction of reunification that's taking place. Let's go on. Similarly, in the Dwapara Kali transition, we had in the beginning of the descending, at the end of the descending Dwapara, and as we begin to enter Kali, we had an age of enlightenment, they called it, the time of Krishna and Buddha and Lao Tzu and Thales and Confucius, Socrates, Plato and Aristotle. So this was an era of great enlightenment and wisdom, right at the tail, catching just the last bit of the tail end of Dwapara going into Kali. And then it all got totally hidden and lost in the base of Kali. And then we're coming around the other side of the horseshoe, and we get into the Renaissance and Copernicus and Martin Luther, Galileo, Descartes, and the Western and Eastern philosophies and teachings that are just raging around the world in their understanding now of meditation and yoga, and all of these things are being much more understood as learning to work with the life force, again, the inner life force. And so it's very similar, as you were saying, coming out of, going down into it and coming out the other end of it, the age of enlightenment, reappears again. Next. Okay. Questions?
It seems the religions we know today all seem distorted into the bottom of Kali Yuga, the bottom of descending, and Kali under Christ was about 8 to 0, and I don't know what Buddha was, whether Christian, and then Muslim was 600. So why would all the religions form then as everything was crashing down afterwards?
Why would they form then?
Well, the founder initiated the religions in deep Kali Yuga.
Well, that's a good question. Why do you think?
Well, I think anytime conditions get really bad, people turn to religion, and maybe the avatar was sent to meet that need that people had when the world was crashing. The world they knew gave a sense of something else beyond that. So I think
The Gita talks about it that way. when vice predominates.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, have you ever heard the axial age, when a lot of the basis for all the religions that still exist actually started at that period that you were talking about in descending Dwapara, when Buddha, Confucius,
Yeah, that's what we were just saying.
Krishna, and even in the Jewish, the Old Testament stuff, that all started at the same time, even though Christianity and the Muslim religions kind of came out of that. But there is this beginning of all of them, really before the Dark Ages, although Christianity obviously started at that time.
Well, he did mention that. That was their source, yeah.
So, but that kind of makes more sense than...
And Swami keeps saying Master is the avatar of Dwapara. He's introducing how to work with the inner life force again, and techniques that everyone can use and experience it for themselves. Any others? Okay.
One of the points the book makes is that as the power of the gods, I remember when I was studying Greek classics, and they go through it, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and through the generations, how the not just the reverence for divine realities, but the actual connection with it. And by the time of the Roman era and the end of the Greek classical period, people had no real belief in those things anymore. It's no coincidence that rational systems of thought would begin to appear, what I would call, for lack of just a simple word to grab it, would be Stoicism, which was Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius and so forth. Humanism, even Buddhism to a lesser degree, represents the disconnection between divine realities. I don't mean to pick on Buddhism, don't get me wrong, but the chop wood, carry water mentality, the Stoic mentality, which is based on rationalism. I only believe in it's agnosticism, essentially. I only believe what I can see, touch, taste, and feel, would naturally arise in an age of general unenlightenment. And it's an attempt, however, that's not to knock it, because it's an attempt to find a rational basis for morality and ethics, isn't it? For right behavior. There is an intuitive element, but it's suppressed or at least hidden to a degree. So you would naturally find we hold these great, Cindy has a wonderful paper she wrote. You should talk to her if you'd like to pursue this. But, the Greek age of reason in descending Dwapara, represented by the Greek philosophers and others, and some of the Roman ones as well, represent humanity's effort to self-assert, yes, but to find a rational basis for life in the absence of a divine and intuitive connection to all life. And so even though in our classical training we uphold those eras and those philosophers as being the epitome of Western culture, the sad truth, as this topic turns our view of history completely on its head, is it's not. It's the epitome of wisdom. The appearance of religions would make sense. We know that in Satyuga there aren't any religions. John Lennon told us that, for heaven's sakes. And so humankind, again, grasping for straws. Jesus Christ was a great yogi, but he didn't teach any yoga techniques, at least outwardly. Our gurus say that he taught them to his close disciples, but we have no proof of that per se, other than his word. And so people would have to fall back on rituals, a mass and various ceremonies, and in some desperate attempt to have a basis for morality with some kind of divine imprimatur, some kind of divine connection. So, intuition exists no matter what in all peoples to some degree, but it had to take on a very disconnected kind of outward form, statues and ceremonies and so forth, and thus arose these different organized so-called religions for our own needs. Now, chapter 20 is actually pretty boring in my book. I don't really care that much about Lucy. She's kind of old, and I like them younger. 3.2 million years old seems over the hill to me. But it's interesting because they quote our guru as saying humankind has lived on this planet 50 million years. And our authors only make the point that it seems like every generation or less, we keep rolling our traditional people keep rolling the clock back. They're up to Lucy 3.2, and so on and so forth. They make the interesting point that the Hobbit man found in Indonesia, who wasn't all that old compared to Lucy, but his characteristics, brain size and so forth, are more or less identical with Lucy. And if it was a question of brain size, Cro-Magnon man would have had it way over us. He had a big head, apparently. So, this whole thing about, imagine millions of years. 24,000-year cycle is nothing. Hundreds of Yuga cycles embedded in millions of years of human history. More to the point, or at least more interesting to me, is somebody wrote a book on what would happen to New York City in 1,000 years if it was left untended. And even down to bacteria that eats plastic. That's how clever bacteria are. The author of the book, and our authors just made passing references to it, tried to describe in whatever that book was what would happen to steel and glass and plastic and these various things if a giant city like New York, would it disappear without a trace? Yes. And when we're talking Yuga cycles, which compared to millions of years is nothing, but 24,000 years, 12,000 years, 5,000 years, this stuff would be gone. It would be recycled by all sorts of other things too, calamities of various sorts, rising seas and glaciers, and my goodness, why does there have to be evidence of such things? Mark?
The book's called The World Without Us. Read it a while ago. But,
did you read it?
Yeah.
Is it worth reading?
High school. Yeah, I was too young to really care. But, on the brain thing, elephants have bigger brains than us, but it doesn't mean that they're smarter than us.
Oh, they're pretty smart, though, I have to say.
Okay.
They remember a lot more than I do.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and they point out, nobody's said this, but my personal pet theory is on the Yuga cycle, is there's no straight lines. It's spiral. Humankind, maybe it wasn't interested in technology in past 24,000 year cycles. There can be an evolution. Why can't there be some evolution? As they point out, our authors, the Yugas regulate dharma, mental virtue, consciousness, not technology. So, I mean, that's the common objection to this postulation is, okay, where are they? Where's the folks who used the oil the last time around, or, you know, made New York cities and so forth? Well, maybe they were too smart. I don't know. Maybe they weren't interested. But there is evidence that we've been around a very, very long time. Okay, I think I'm... Oh, that's it? Oh, okay. They all look the same. I've never heard of Mount Toba, but they make the claim, and I assume they must have evidence for it, that this thing encircled the planet for years in darkness, or at least relative darkness, with very little sunlight. They said, they quoted somebody as saying that probably this Earth was down to thousands of humans, not even millions, thousands. That's how much life was destructed. Our guru, Yogananda, and we think of myth stories of the Great Flood and so forth. The yogis talk about how, quite notwithstanding the Yuga cycles at all, that there are partial dissolutions of different planets. Things like great floods or Mount Toba and other things that do occur from time to time, in which much of the life on the planet is all but destroyed. They also make the point that Padma made already earlier, which is that with a very small population, you can't support an infrastructure of freeways and so on and so forth. Okay, I think I'll, is that it for me? Yeah, go to the next one. Okay, I'm going to skip all this cool stuff so that Padma can talk.
Yeah, well, there's not much at the end either. It's the tipping point. They point out that with science, there's constantly new discoveries, and with the new discoveries, the old postulations are being rethought and refigured, and so it's constantly changing, that there's much that remains to be discovered. And they point out that in archaeology and anthropology specifically, there isn't that much discovery happening, not nearly as much as is possible because of funding, because there's no immediate use for it. It can't feed us. It can't create the next new R&D technology. And so the money, the big money, goes towards technology and other things that can provide financial benefits. And archaeology and anthropology are left lagging behind. They cite, for example, that 1/100th of 1% of all the sites, archaeological sites on the Nile, have been examined. I mean, that's how much that they know is there to be examined, but there isn't enough funding or people creating the expertise in that arena to be able to go and do that. So there's a lot still about history and the past that can be discovered that isn't because of this. Next. So from objective measurement to subtle realities to spiritual realities and life force. That's essentially the direction that this descending Dwapara was going, and by comparison, the ascending Dwapara. We're going towards direct personal experience. We're moving, thank God we're having this class while we're in an ascending age. Just think how depressing this would be if we were on the other end of the spectrum, you know. Our enlightenment of the past gives us a glimpse of our enlightenment of the future. And Sri Yukteswar, of course, then describes that the Yugas describe, much like the caste system describes, our tendencies and our own energy level, our cumulative karma, and where we're at in that moment, and whether we're focused on matter or Kali, whether we're focused on life force or Dwapara, whether we're focused on divine magnetism or Treta and the awareness of spirit of Satya. We've talked about that a lot throughout all of these chapters, that all of these different yugas exist within us to different degrees, and we can experience Satya Yuga now. We can know God now, and we can live in the world and not of it now, which is Nirvikalpa Samadhi. We can be Jivan Muktas now, and that's what Yogananda came to tell us and give us the technique and the body of understanding and teaching that we could work with. And so it's good to study the outer cycles of time, but we have to always take it and understand it, that it's really going on also on the inside. And even as, they talked about in the book, in these different yugas, just like there's a Christ in the middle of Kali Yuga, in these different yugas, there are different people who have the consciousness of Satya or Treta or Dwapara. And so we saw a live interview of, or it was a lost interview of Jobs, Steve Jobs, or however you pronounce his name. And it was fascinating because his answers to questions were very Dwapara. I mean, they were Treta, he was just on the cutting edge of thought constantly. I mean, he never stopped. He didn't stop with one discovery. He just kept going because he was just so thrilled to be in this age where you could be discovering all these things, and he knew they were there to be had. In the prior cycle, they would have called him a Renaissance man, These are people who are living in that consciousness, that Treta consciousness, who are ahead of their time. And within each age, we have variations of that, and within ourselves, we have variations of that. Next slide. And that's how Sri Yukteswar ends this thought on the yugas, and that's where the guys, the authors, end the thought. And so we say, thank you, Sri Yukteswarji, for getting us to think. So I just want to conclude really briefly with our
new T-shirt, Satya Yuga Now.
We talked about this in the very beginning. Those of you who've not studied the Rajasi book, which is the Way of the Sangis and the first year sadhakas, the Rajasi book, Nritti and myself will be downstairs next week in the large classroom with you, and we'll be going over the beginning of the book through chapter 3. And for those, the rest of you, sadhakas and sevakas, you'll be going over Swami's little novel, The Time Tunnel, with... Right. Thank you, Larry. Next week is Kriya meditation. Okay. So we were talking about April 1st. Thank you. And April 1st... Pardon? Yeah. And for the time tunnel, we are talking the beginning through chapter 6. So you have 2 weeks to do your reading for these, and next week to come to Kriya meditation. John Clark.
No, Sarah has a question. I'm not sure I can explain it. But last week, Vyasa was saying that the 24,000 year cycle was about 24,000 years. And then he mentioned a number 25,000 something.
Right, precession. Right.
What's that?
That's the, astronomers calculate the length of the precession, and its full cycle will be 25,600 years. Yeah. Well, actually nobody really knows, but it's pretty close. And Sri Yukteswar uses the word about. He says it's about 24,000
It's like
years.
about 365 days in a
So
year.
the extra 1,500 years is inside that thing.
Yeah, I don't know. But you know, when you look at your Kriya Mala, 100 beads and 108, it's an 8% difference. Difference between 24,000 and 25,600 is 8%. Check it out.
On that note, can we close with a healing prayer for Jane again? It'd be nice if we could all stand and do that.
There are two Janes, pardon.
Jane Niebauer. Divine Mother, Thou art omnipresent.
Thou art omnipresent.
Thou art in Jane.
Thou art in Jane.
Manifest thy healing power
Manifest thy healing power
in her body,
in her body,
in her mind,
in her mind,
and in her soul.
and in her soul.
Shanti, shanti. Thank you all.